Is Dunkirk worth all the hype? Let's find out. Hello Fanatics, I'm Dylan Phillips, and this is the Film Fanatic Review bringing you Dunkirk, starring Fionn, Whitehead, Mark Rylance, and Tom Hardy. First, we'll tell you what the movie is about, and our initial thoughts. Then we'll move on to our spoiler-free likes and dislikes. We'll finish up with our spoiler-heavy thoughts on this film, and our final word. Dunkirk follows the real-life story of hundreds of thousands of British and Allied troops who are surrounded by enemy forces, trapped on the beach with their backs to the sea. Overall, this is a decent war film. It can feel like a documentary at times, but for the most part, it's one of the grittiest and most realistic depictions of war we've seen on screen. For what I liked about this film, the acting was great. The fear the character showed in this film definitely set a bone-chilling tone. Standouts to me were Mark Rylance, Jack Lowden, Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, and Kenneth Branagh. And of course, we can't talk about this film without talking about the masterful direction of Christopher Nolan. This is probably his best looking film to date. The cinematography in this film was outstanding, and all the shots definitely added to the tone and atmosphere of the story. Most of the shots felt like old war films, which definitely brought a nostalgia to the genre, but also created and paved its new path. The sound mixing in this movie is marvelous, with the blending of the instrumental score with the heartbeat and ticking noises, surrounding that with all of the gunfire and explosions. It definitely gave a frantic feeling to the situation. However, this story doesn't have a true protagonist. In the film, we follow three different storylines, one on land, one in the air, and one at sea. And yet there's no true protagonist. There are characters in each of these storylines that we do follow prominently, but none of these characters stand out as one true character that we're supposed to follow throughout the evacuation of Dunkirk. There isn't really any character development, and we merely invest in these characters based on just knowing the situation they're in and watching their facial expressions and their actions rather than learning about them as people. As much as that helps the tone and frantic feel of this story and doesn't romanticize it, it does feel more documentary style with a lack of protagonist. It's more or less giving us a factual-based story about what happened at Dunkirk rather than giving us a romanticized story set in the event. And this isn't really a knock against the story of the film, it's merely just an observation. The story also becomes a little non-linear in Christopher Nolan fashion, and as much as it does work in his other films, in this one I found it a bit confusing. He would go about 60% of the way in one storyline and then jump back to another one that would only be about 20% of the way, and because of that jumping, it got a little bit confusing and jarring at times. And I think having this film as a PG rating was definitely not a good call. It's a war film, you have to have R-rated action. But to me, the biggest issue was with the aspect ratio again. I went and saw this movie in IMAX because most of this film was filmed on IMAX cameras. And yet, just like Transformers, there was an issue with the aspect ratio. And it wasn't as bad as Transformers because Transformers, it would happen within the same scene where you just go between two robots fighting and it would change the aspect ratio from normal to having banners like a widescreen. Yet, in this film, you still had that, it just happened between going through the different storylines. So I found a lot of the time when they were on land, it would be the full aspect ratio, and then when they went out to sea, it would be the cropped, bannered widescreen ratio. And I found that I liked the bannered more because it looked more cinematic and gave an old school feel to the war film, but the jump back and forth just got a little bit annoying after a while. And that's where I'll end our spoiler-free thoughts on this film. If you want to hear our final word or rating of this film, pause now and click the link in the description, because now it's time for spoilers. First off, I absolutely love the storyline with the pilots, played by Jack Lowden and Tom Hardy. I felt like they had the most character development and relationship built between the two of them, and they were completely badass. The story following Mark Rylance and his boat was definitely the most emotional and gripping of the three, merely because from his backstory, you could see the pain in his character. He knew that he wanted to do something and he'd do anything to help, and he was a little too old. He lost a son in the war, so he really wanted to help as best he could. That and the fact that Cillian Murphy's character's in there, who's experiencing some major PTSD, it just made that whole storyline very, very real. I was also pleasantly surprised by the acting of Harry Styles. for his limited development, he definitely gave us a pretty decent character. The shots depicting the boat sinking, the soldiers drowning, and the beaches being bombed definitely helped create a feeling of claustrophobia and true fear. Now, I did say that the non-linear storyline was a bit confusing to me, and the reason I said that is because throughout the movie, it's pretty linear as they're going between the three different storylines, but the part that really got me is when you see Cillian Murphy being rescued by Mark Rylance on the sunk ship, and then moments later you see Cillian Murphy's character standing in a boat as they're attempting to save guys who just jumped off of a sinking battleship, and that got a little bit confusing to me because I didn't know if perhaps he had a twin that we didn't know about or what, but at that point it started to become non-linear and it got a little bit confusing as to where events were occurring. And to me, the best shots were the opening scene in the city of Dunkirk, the beaches being bombed, the battleship going down and the soldiers having to get out of the claustrophobic space, all of the fighter pilot scenes, and then the final scene on the train where after the entire movie, the ticking just ends and the heartbeat stops, and finally the soldiers have silence. So, with the thoughts heard, here's our final word. Dunkirk is a real, gripping, and emotionally driven war film that places you right in the middle of the conflict, making you feel the fear of uncertainty in the grim situation. While it has its minor issues, its great performances, cinematography, sound mixing, and score are sure to make it a contender come awards season. The film, as I said many times, felt like a documentary, and it didn't have an R rating, which I expect from the war genre, so I'm gonna give Dunkirk an 8.5. Thanks everybody for watching our review. Are you planning on seeing Dunkirk, or if you've already seen it, do you have something to add? What did you think of the story? Let us know in the comments below. I'm Dylan Phillips, and this has been the Film Fanatic Review. If you liked this video and you want to see more, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Check out our latest Worth the Watch video, where we recap and review Season 1 of the Netflix original, Friends from College. Don't forget to follow us on our social media. And until next time, Fanatics, keep it real.